Okay, so it's lesson 5, server-side scripting, of enterprise computing. And so last week we wired up our store pages to our SQL server so we could go in and get some real data. And then we also looked at using the scaffolding tool. So we scaffolded out an index view that gave us full create, read, update, delete functionality. So we're going to scaffold out another controller and set of views. This time what we want is we're going to create a controller called the store manager, and that's actually used to manage the actual products in the store. So we can add, edit, delete the albums. But once we do, we're going to see from the scaffold, it's going to give us 5 functional views, but they're really not of production level quality. There's going to be information missing and usability issues in terms of those views. So we're going to do a lot to customize those views once they're scaffolded out so that they make a lot more sense to the end user. So we'll go to our controllers. And let's add a new controller. And we'll pick the same option that we picked the end of last week and that you probably picked in your assignment. So we want the controller with views using Entity Framework. So let's let it generate all of the create, read, update, delete methods in the controller as well as the corresponding view files. Now it actually remembers within a solution, once you scaffold one view, it remembers most of the options. So last week when we did this the first time, this was pretty much blank, but it defaults to the last layout file. It defaults to the data context class we built. So all we need to do are enter 2 things. First of all is what model. So we want this based on the album model. We're not going to call it albums controller, however. We're going to give it a different name. We're going to call it the store manager controller. So today, all of these pages are going to be public. Next week, when we look at implementing authentication, we're going to want to protect this entire section. So you can only get into the store manager if you've logged into the site. It should be for basically the store owner only. It's not for the end user. So just pick album as model, controller name is store manager. Our data context should default to the music store model, and our layout should default to our shared layout template. So let's save that. Let it run. And once this is built, we can add a link in our layout, add a link to the store manager index view in the nav bar. Navigate in here easily. We don't have to keep typing the URL in the address bar. Right, so it scaffolds out the same kind of stuff we saw before. Notice it already, when we get the list of albums, it already will include the artist and genre, which is good because it recognizes those relationships from the database. And it scaffolds out. So even when we're creating, notice it's going to generate 2 drop-down lists and stick them in the view bag with the list of artists and the list of genres. Because we want to add an album, we need to pick the genre, we need to pick the artist. So all that stuff's already here for both adding and deleting. And our views, now we've got a store manager subfolder with our 5 views. So let's compile, because anytime we change the back end of things, we're going to need to build. We need that new controller added to our DLL file. So let's do a quick build. And I'll close everything up for today. Let's just open up our layout template. So in views, shared, and layout, I'm sure by now everyone knows how to get here. You all changed this in your assignments. I started looking at some of them already. So let's add one more link to the nav bar that will load the new index view we just generated. So our link can say store manager. and it'll load the index view in the store manager controller. So we'll put a space here because that's just the text to be displayed. No space in the third parameter because that's the name of the controller file. And our file names never have spaces unless we like breaking stuff. No need to build, we've already built. We should just be able to refresh any page now. Our store manager link should show up in the nav bar. We can click it and we should get a list of all the albums being displayed. So we should be able to go anywhere here. We should have a store manager link. So our index view now grabs all the albums, displays them to us. So for today, this link is going to be visible and all these views are public. Next week, we're going to modify it so that it should work like this instead. As a public user, we shouldn't actually see the store manager. So notice here, I'm not logged in. Once I'm authenticated, I get access to those items in the nav bar. When I log out, they're going to go away. So we'll kind of replicate this functionality next week. For today, we'll just keep it public. I'll close up the layout file. Actually, I'll leave it open. We're going to need to do something else with it a bit later. So here's our page. It's functional. I would suggest it's not production ready. If we had a client who actually had an online music store and we said, here you go, here's the page to manage your albums, they're probably not going to be too thrilled, right? So what things are they going to ask us to do with this page? How can it be improved? Okay, so yeah, so we've basically got a couple options here. There's a field in the database for the image. So we basically have two options with this column. What two things would you do? Displaying the file path is a lousy idea, but that's what the scaffolding does by default. So what could you do to improve that column? Okay, one is we could change that to an image tag and actually show the images here. That would be one option, yep. What would our other option be? Potentially. Yeah, we'll do that. It won't be on this page. We will come to that. We'll look at doing a file upload today. Because yeah, right, if I go in and edit here, it just gives me a text box for this. It just says, it's a string, the database, it's a string. It's not smart enough to know that this is actually a file. So yeah, we'll want to replace that with a file upload and also display the image here. Now there's actually about 250 albums in here. So we could display the pictures. From a performance point of view, that may not be the best idea. Why not? Yeah, it's a lot of images. That may make the page slow to load and manipulate. So our other option is we could just blow that column out of here. We don't really need it. So that's one thing I would suggest we want to change is maybe we'll get rid of this column. You have to actually go into the album to see the art. That'd be one thing we could change. What else should get changed here? I can think of it, see at least 3 or 4 other things from a usability perspective that we should change. Sorry, Alex?
No sort function?
Okay, there's no ability to sort. Yep, we'll want to add that. Jeff? Okay, we could paginate it. Yep. We might skip that one for today, but that's probably a good idea as well. What else? Here. Somebody said something about the header. Sorry, Tyrell? Yeah, there's actually a specific problem with the header. Yeah, we've got 2 columns that say name, right? Because this comes from the album, from the artist table. This comes from the genre table. They each have a property called name. Well, that's lousy. So this one should say artist, and that one should say genre. even the page title above our create new just says index. Doesn't really describe, like, all of the index views say index, which isn't really very helpful. That should probably say albums. Maybe we want to also show the number of albums that are here. And even, I mean, I agree with you, Jeff, we probably should allow, whatever we've given someone a column data, we should allow them to sort it any way they want, but we also should set up some sort of default. When the page first loads, the data should be presented in some kind of meaningful order. And if you look here, it's actually not in really any meaningful order at all. It looks sort of alphabetical, but not really. So this is just sorted with no sort order. If we look at the index method in the controller, if we open up the, go back to the store manager controller here. So there is no sorting at all. So how is this list sorted by default when a user first goes here? Yeah, basically by the album ID sequentially, lowest to highest. So every time we add a new album, it'll just show up at the bottom of that list, which is kind of hard for a user to sort through. So we probably also want to change this query so that we have a default sorting. So what would make sense when we first click Store Manager and get this list before the user has a chance to then specify a different sort order? What do you think it would make sense? What columns might it make sense to sort this by default? How would you want to see this list if you own this business?
By genre first and then by the name of the album.
Okay, so we could do that. And if that was the case, we'd probably want to move this column to be the first column in the table. So that'd be one option. I think somebody else made it. Was that Tyrell? Did you have a different suggestion? Okay, we could also sort it by artist name. Or we could do first by artist and then by album title. So show me, you know, all of Ozzy Osbourne here, but then make sure they're also sorted alphabetically within artist. So if we do that, we probably also want to swap genre maybe to the end. Okay. So there's no real right or wrong, but we should sort it one way or another, at least. We also probably want to format the price as currency. We should do that too. Okay. So in terms of doing all these changes, some of these changes we can change directly in the view. Some of them, like having an initial sort order, that's going to happen in the controller. And later on, things like the price, that'll actually happen in the model. We can set up a format that whenever this price column is displayed, it displays it as currency. That's probably more efficient than setting it on every individual view. So let's open up our index view and let's start making a few of these changes. And then we'll later on look at edit, right? We've got some lousy labels here. We can't upload a new image. We can't see the current image. This list looks pretty good until you scroll to the bottom and realize it isn't really. Same here. So again, we want to fix all this stuff so this is a lot more usable. It looks better, it's easier for someone to use. So we'll start with the index view. We'll make the changes we can there for starters. So I can kind of close everything up. So let's open up the Store Manager's index view. We can start right here on line 8 with the heading. Let's change index to say albums. Later on, we can also figure out how to display the current number of albums. The other thing we're going to add later is we want the ability to filter. We want to search, like this could be a huge music store, like this could be iTunes. So we should maybe allow somebody to search by title. So we can add maybe up here a little search box where the user could put in a title and we could filter the albums based on that. So we'll change our heading. So for now, so these come out of our model. We've got our two headings that both say name. So we'll just hard code. Let's overwrite these. We'll make the first one artist and the second one genre. Let's get rid of the album art URL column altogether. We'll just delete that one. And our last column heading is blank. I prefer if we're going to put a column in, it should have some kind of heading. So the last column is for the links, so the actions. So I'm going to put in a heading that says actions. Down here inside our loop, we can also get rid of the TD containing the album art URL. We're just going to remove this column entirely. It's really not necessary here. So we've gone from 6 columns down to 5, and we've given more meaningful headings to the 3 of the columns. So nothing drastic. It also means our buttons don't wrap, our table doesn't wrap anymore, which is better. We've got an actions, and at least we've got descriptive headings for the page in the first 2 columns. I think I'd also like to swap these 2 columns. I'm going to put title second so we can sort the list, set the default sorting first by artist, A to Z, and then by title. So if we're going to sort by this column and then this column, probably makes sense to have them next to each other. So I'm just going to drag my genre column down below. And I'll do the same. I'll just swap. So I just moved title and genre. So title is now my second column. So let's make this sortable. I agree with Jeff's suggestion. We should be able to sort these. So we want it so the user can click on any column heading and our grid should auto sort. First one direction, they click it again, it sorts the other direction. Right now we don't have that functionality. So the easy way to do this is to use, there's a simple JavaScript library that we can plug in that we can use to do this. We basically grab a script file, add it to our project, add a link to it in our layout file so that any of our pages can use it. It's not specific to this view. Might be handy to use on other views as well. And then we just have to add one simple class definition to our table tag. And then we can maybe modify the CSS a little bit. So if you go into your week 5 folder on Blackboard, there's a link here. Sortable.js. So if you open this up, take you to the page, just a simple free JavaScript library. So it takes a static HTML table and gives us the little arrows and does the bidirectional sorting. So we can implement this into our view. And by adding it in the layout page, it's available to any of our views. So if we scroll down, here are the instructions where you start to see some kind of reddish orange text. Step number 1, download the script file. So I'll just right click, save my link. Whoops. Where should it go inside of the web project? Which folder contains client-side JavaScript? We already have a whole bunch that came bundled with our Visual Studio template. Yeah, in scripts. So if you open scripts, right, when you set up the MVC template in Visual Studio, it automatically pulls all these JavaScripts into the scripts folder. So this is for our client-side JS. So just save it here. Now so the file is now here, it's on our file system. If I open my scripts folder, we can see it here. But if I go back to Visual Studio and open the scripts folder, issue because if I push the solution to GitHub, it's not included because it's not being tracked as part of our solution. So here's how we fix that. If you click on scripts and click this little button here, it says show all files. I may have to click refresh, and now I can see my sortable.js, but it's grayed out. It doesn't have that red icon, script icon, like all my other files do. Means Visual Studio now sees it on the file system, but it's not part of the project. It's outside. It's on the other side of the glass looking in. To get it included in the project, all you have to do is right-click it, and from the context menu, choose Include. And now it's part of the solution. You can see the icon changes. If I right-click and exclude it, it's gone and it gets grayed out. We want to make sure that it's got the same icon, the same red icon as everything else. So that was step one. The library, we've put it in the project. Step two is add a script tag on whatever file we want. No point putting it directly in our index because then it's only available here. We might want to reuse this. It's kind of a generic library. So it would make sense. We've opened up the layout file already to add our new link in the nav bar. So let's add it down at the bottom. And by adding it in the project, it'll also come up in our path prompts. So as I type equals, I can choose scripts. So I don't even have to type the name. I can just select it from the pop-up. So by putting it in the footer of our layout, all our views have access to this. So we can implement it wherever we want. Just to double check and make sure that script is accessible to us now, if we go back and refresh our view, and we view the page source. If we go down to the bottom, here's our link, and if we click it, the script should load. This is the quick way to check. If ever our client-side JavaScripts don't seem to be running, view the source, click on the link, make sure the script file actually shows up in the browser. Then we know it's there and the path is right. So that was step two. So download, link to it. Step three, add the class sortable to your table. Now notice there is one little gotcha here. The actual script file has 2 T's, but the class name it wants us to apply has 1 T. I don't know why this is, to be honest with you. So let's go to back to our index view now. And inside the table tag, we should be able to add sortable. Visual Studio doesn't recognize it because it's looking for CSS classes. This class it's not used for CSS, it's used for attaching the JavaScript. So if we add sortable with 1 T, go back and refresh our page, you now should be able to click any column heading and your columns should sort up or down. which they do. It gives us the little arrow indicator and sorts. Now, there's only one other little trick with this. There's only one thing about this library they didn't include. They gave us some sample CSS that we could add, but it says cursor default. There's not necessarily, when a user first loads this, there's no real indicator that these are actually clickable. So we could set in CSS that when the user mouses over them, the cursor gets changed to the hand. Right, so that's a cue to the user that, yeah, you can click on this and something will happen. So we could just add a quick class into our CSS file for that. So in our content and our site.css, here we've got a th tag. I'm just going to add underneath it. So this is lines down to line 317. So if the table has a class of sortable, for the th, we'll set the cursor to a pointer. That will display out the little hand icon when the user moves their mouse over top of any column heading. So if I save that and refresh, we can, there. So now when I'm over the column heading, at least I get an indicator that I can click to sort. Otherwise, there's a good chance we'll build that functionality and the user will never click it because they never know it's there. So we didn't put it on every th, only the table headings for any table we've attached this class to. If we wanted it to be global on the site, every th, well, we would just have to add that sortable class to all our tables, and then we wouldn't need a separate definition. We could just add the cursor pointer in here, and it would be global. So our view is improving. We can sort. We got rid of the column that didn't make sense. We got rid of the headings that didn't really make sense. There's still a couple other things we want to do here. We still haven't dealt with this issue, which is the default sort order. When you first come here, the data is just in order by ID, which is useless to the end user. So this is something, rather than modifying through the view, we need to modify through the controller. We want to change the actual data in the controller before it even gets here. So we'll go to our controller, we'll change that, and then we'll modify the view a bit more and we'll add a little search form here. And we'll need to write a method in the controller to process that search. So let's go to our controller. We'll see if we can do it. We may have to do, actually, I think we do it right here. So it's using our albums model and the relationships in Entity Framework between the models to get the related artists and genres. But it just spits back the list in the default order. Our toList function has additional functions we can chain on. So if we put in a dot, we can now write an order by, add an order by method on top of it. So get the list, but then order the list. So we're going to use another one of these lambda expressions. So we want, first we want to order by artist name. So I've just added what's in blue. And we can build and we can try it again by clicking the Store Manager link. And if that works, we can then, after this, we can order by the next column, which is the album title. So let's see what this gives us. So your scaffold is always going to order your data automatically just by the ID number. So the oldest record first, then the newest record last. It's pretty rare that we're going to want to see data that way. Occasionally, but not usually. So we can add an order by to any scaffolded index method to get an order that makes more sense for us. So let's try it again. So now it's fully alphabetized. We won't see any A's down at the bottom. However, within a particular artist, the titles, again, it's first by artist ID, but then it defaults to album ID if we have the same artist. So we want to now kind of daisy chain on another order by. In fact, but we don't order by, we can only use once. But we have a function called then by. So order by this, then by that. I don't know if I can use A again. I don't think so, but we'll try. I may have to use another alias. Yeah, so yeah, when I use A, so let's say B. Oh wait, sorry, hang on. Maybe I can use A. A dot. Oh yes, I can. First by name, and then by title. So in the first case, A is just an alias. What's really an alias for the albums in both cases. So order by you can only use once. Then by is unlimited. So we can have as many then by statements as we need to if we wanted to order by a whole bunch of different fields, more than just two. There's no limit to how many then by methods we could chain on. So now it should be not only by artist, but then within a particular artist, it should be alphabetized by title. Well, I guess I should look down at various artists, which before was not sorted. The album titles. Yeah, so A, S, V. So first by this column, then by this column. I think, Nikita, you had suggested you might want to see it by genre, then by artist, then by title. So you could do it that way, right? Just put genre as your first column, and then order by genre, then by artist, then by title. That would work if you prefer to see it that way. That's kind of maybe a question for our customer. How do you want to see this stuff? Although, of course, they still have the ability to sort on their own as well.
Curious, could you have maybe a prompt that would say, like, based on, you could ask how you want it sorted, and then have maybe like 2 prompts, and it could change how it sorts based on what they get?
Sure.
Is that possible to have?
So you could. So the idea here would be your index method would then need optional parameters, right? So when you call the method, you could be passing in perhaps an array of columns.
Okay.
And then you would order by, you generate that dynamically.
Okay.
So it's probably easier to just do it on the client side, but technically, is that possible? Yes.
Yeah.
So we've made a few customizations in the view. We've made one customization in the controller now. So it's not that hard to find an artist or a genre because it's easy to sort. However, title's not so easy because maybe we're looking for a particular word in the title, but by sorting, you know, it only shows us it's sorted by the start of the title. It doesn't really let us search for a word within the title. Like maybe we want to see all of the live albums. So the word live is anywhere in that album title. Right now we have no easy way to do that. So if we add a little form here, we can let the user search for something within the album title, and then we could filter out the list. Actually, sorry, one other thing I want to do here. We should also display, let's display the number of albums so they always know how many records there are. So this would be an appropriate spot to use the view bag. We can calculate, we have access to a count property of this albums object here. So we could just count it, we could stick that in the view bag. It's not a strongly typed object, it's just a single value we can figure out in the controller and hand to the view. So we could just set up a property called album count. Count the albums. So then we can display, before our title that says albums, we can display the number in the heading. So ViewBag's good for this, just a quick and dirty exchange, shuffle of maybe a value or two. So we'll compile. So count, make sure you've got the brackets. It is a method call. It's not considered a property, it's a method. So here in front of albums, we can now add our viewbag dot. We'll just put that right in as part of the page heading. And we'll also fill this with our little search form. So if we search for something, we'll see how many search results got returned. So when we click, it should tell us, I think it's going to give us 246. So I just added the view bag here. So we're going to change this little section at the top. For some strange reason, the scaffold decides to wrap this link in a P tag, which is terrible HTML formatting. P should be when we have paragraphs of actual text. So we're going to break this up. We're going to replace the P tag with a section tag. And we'll use Bootstrap to kind of anchor that link over to the left. And then we'll create another section over on the right, which is bigger. And we'll add text right. That'll anchor the form right off to the right. It'll be right aligned with our table this way. So we're going to create a mini form that just has a text box and a search button. So we could use a regular HTML form. I'm going to use the syntax, the Razor syntax. So I'm going to call the begin form method. So in here, we need a regular standard HTML text box, which we'll call title. And we'll say it's required. So they can't run the search if they haven't typed anything in the box. And we'll just use the placeholder. We won't bother with a label to the left. We can just put a placeholder in the box which disappears as they type. And we'll just put on a button. That says search. So our form won't do anything yet, but if we refresh our page now, we should have a text box and submit button off to the right side of the area where it says create new on the left. Just check it out. I'll put the code back up. I don't want BTN primary. Get that BTN default. There. There's a little text box. As we type, the placeholder automatically disappears. There is one other thing we should add, excuse me, add in here. If we look at, I'm just going to open up the the create form for a minute. So it uses the begin form. We probably want this as well. We want the anti-forgery token, which prevents cross-site scripting attacks. So other domains or other users not on our domain we won't accept the form post from them. So we probably want to put this on all of our forms. So just call that method. What this will do at runtime is generate a hidden input field with the token that's generated on the server. And it will verify that any post requests received have that token. So we'll want that here. So here I'll compare. So this is how it is. I haven't refreshed. So here's our form here without the token. There's just our form. It posts to the store manager index with our input. If I refresh this and we look at the source, there's no visible change. However, this part gets added. There's our request verification token, which the server will automatically check if we tell our controller method, hey, check for this token. So it's an added security measure, probably a good idea to include on all our forms. All the scaffolded, the create and edit forms already have it. So if we're building our own, we should probably include that as well. So now we need to go to our controller. We have an index method in the controller, but this only runs a get. There's no post method. So we can fill out the form and submit it, but nothing's going to happen. It's going to run another get right now. There's no handler for it. So in our controller, let's set up the post. So there's the URL. And I'll just put in a comment explaining what this is. Okay, so we'll create a new method that returns an action result. The method is called index because we're still on the index view. But notice here it says we've already got a member with the same signature. So the get version has no parameters, but our post method should take one parameter. What parameter are we passing into the post method? Yeah, it's going to be a string that we called. What's the name of the field it's going to look for? Yeah. It matches the name of our search box, which we called title, right? So in our view, we gave it an attribute of title. So that's the parameter that's going to come in here. Now down at the bottom, just to get our error to go away, we'll say return view. Now by default, notice these run get. So here are get method for index, get method for details, get method for create. But here's our post method for create. Notice it has these two declarations above it. So because the default HTTP method is get, if we want to run a different kind of method, we need to tell our controller, hey, this is not a get method. It's an HTTP post, HTTP delete, or something else. Also, we want to tell it to validate the anti-forgery token. It won't do it automatically. So if we add these two tags to our post method, that helps our controller know what to do. So this is a post method. And before it runs, we want to validate that token. So now we want to run a similar query to what we have here, but we need a where in there, right? Where this string appears anywhere in the album title name. And again, we want to order it by artist name and then by title in our results. We also will want to set the view bag, set the album count. So how many albums match this search term. So we're going to set up a where. Oops, I think I need my lambda expression. No, maybe I don't. Hold on, sorry. Okay, we don't in this case. So select all the albums where the title contains, it has a contains function, so it will run like an SQL-like command. And I guess we also want our order by here. So again, we'll order by artist name. Okay, I guess if I write it this way, I'll do it that way. So now let's return albums. And again, let's set the album count. So our link queries, they're modeled on SQL, but they're not exactly SQL commands. So let's build and try a search. Okay, so when I search for live, we get 16 results, still sorted properly. And we can still, or column sorting still works because it's the same list, just we've replaced the data set with a subset of the whole thing. Okay. And we made it required so you can't search the whole thing. If you don't add anything, it won't search. Or anything where there's multiple volumes, we could search that. But show me all the albums with multiple volumes. Alex?
So I'm just curious, how would they do it? A lot of the newer sites, they go by letters. So as you're typing, L, everything else comes up, and then I. It starts to like shrink.
With autocomplete, typically that's using jQuery and or Ajax. Right? So if we wanted to do something like that, so what you have to do in that case is you have to get the full list to start in memory. You may not display it, but you already have to have the list. And then they're using jQuery or Ajax to filter that list in response to keystrokes. So if you ever wanted to implement that, you want to look for jQuery autocomplete. So something like this. So there's widgets, and so there's a script library you can plug in. Doing anything. Oh. Right. So it's got the whole list. It doesn't run the query each time. It runs the query and gets the full list, and then it just filters the list as you type, is how it works. So it's not that hard to actually implement. So here, there's a widget, right? So you can just go in here, and they'll give you a, so it's a library you can download, just follow the docs and you can plug it in. Okay, so we've done almost everything we wanted to do here. We will come back. The only other thing we'll want is we'll want to format the price, but we're going to want to kind of make that change globally. So we'll come back to that towards the end of class when we look at doing customizations through our models. There's still some more customizations we want to make just through the views and the controllers to what we've already got. So let's go in here to our edit view. We should deal with a few things here. Again, we'll deal with those later through the models. We probably should sort these lists. We then want to replace this so that it doesn't just print the path, it actually shows the image as well as gives the user the ability to actually upload an image. Actually, maybe we'll start with the image. And then there's this label as well. We'll deal with that through the model. So let's open up our edit view. So notice it's got our begin form, it's got our token. Excuse me. Let's scroll down here to this section, lines 53 through 59. We should all have the same line numbers because the scaffold built everybody's should be the same. Let's take out the code on line 56 and 57. That's the text box that displays the image path and a validator message. Text box is useless here. So let's remove it. What we want is if there is an image, we want to actually display it using an HTML image tag. Now it's possible we may have an album where we don't have an image, so we don't want to render that IMG tag every time because there may not be anything there. So we'll want a little if statement to check. So we can write logic directly in our Razor view. So there's different ways to check it. I'll just check the length of that value. So if the URL is greater than 0, then we'll display an image tag. Now, if we look at our database for a minute, actually, I can just do it right through here, I guess. We'll just take a quick peek at our album table, because we have to figure out the path. So if I just run a quick query. Whoops, oh, I hit the wrong button. Now my debugger started, oh, that's a pain in the ass. Okay, run my query. So notice, I know it's a little hard to see, the image files already contain the path. Normally, I wouldn't create the data this way. It's silly to take up all that space in the database, repeating the path if it's going to be the same for every album. I would just store the album names. Anyway, they included that path, content images. So we don't need to specify the path in our image tag. It's already part of the actual data itself in the SQL Server. So in our edit view, the source of our image can simply be model dot, whoops, sorry. I needed the app. So we don't have to specify the path as content and images because all the records have the word content/images in the database. Normally, I wouldn't do it that way. I would actually put the path in my Razor view and not bother repeating that path over and over again with all my files in the database. It's not very efficient, but that's the data set we got. We'll work with what we got. So we shouldn't need to compile here or anything. We're just changing the view. We haven't changed any logic in the controller. So now if we refresh any album, they all have this album cover as placeholder. So it shows up. And I can go in and pick anything and it'll show up. But we also want a file upload ability, right? Because maybe we add the album, we don't have the cover album art yet, or we need to change the image somehow. The image is no good. The cover's been changed. We want to resize it, whatever the case may be. We also want the ability to modify it. So let's add, right above the image, let's add a simple file upload box. Give it a type of file as file. Now the name is important because we want this control to be bound to our album art URL field. We need to give it the name of album art URL. And we should probably also give it an ID of the same. I'll show you why this is important. So this will give the user a browse button, which will open up a file dialog box. Here's why that's important. If we look at the post method that runs when we go to save our change, notice in the post method, so in the HTTP post for edit, it accepts a parameter of an album object, but before it, the scaffold binds. That bind connects the controls with those names to the corresponding fields of the album object. So if we don't name our file upload, if we don't name it album art URL, that connection isn't there. So if we refresh the view now, we can't upload yet, but at least we're going to have the ability to go and pick a file. It isn't going to do anything yet, though. Need your pen? Okay. So we'll just set this up. We'll write the code. With things, but time for us to take a break. Just before we do, though, I've grabbed a couple album covers. They're on Blackboard. So I want you to save them, but don't save them to content and images. We want to use the file upload box to copy them to content images. So here's what I typically do. Whenever I'm making an application, just to show you some examples, I always get a whole bunch of files from my clients. They may be Word documents with content, they may be images. And typically when you get images from your clients, you usually can't use them on a website as they are. Because typically they take them with a phone or a tablet and the image files are like 8,000 by 6,000 pixels and they're 2 or 3 megabytes each. They're these massive files and you're gonna have to resize them and compress them before they're usable. So you typically get all kinds of stuff from a client. So what I usually do is I create a folder called working and I dump all the stuff I get from my client in there.
The solution, like project folder?
Yeah, so I make a folder. So I'll go back to my project folder. So I don't put it right in my web project. So if here's my project for, now this is just my own workflow. You don't have to do this, but I find this works well. So go into the main, so just like we had the assets that we downloaded, right? Those images and the CSS. So in your main folder where your solution is, I suggest creating a working folder. I can actually move the assets. I gave you these back in week 2 or 3. Move them in, I can just put them in there, really. So these are files I'm working with, but it's not really my code. Files I'm going to use as I'm building the application. I keep that stuff in here. You know, maybe my client wants to see screenshots of progress, so I'll take some screenshots, dump them in the working folder. So it's separate from my application code, but at least I have this stuff. Let's save these 2 files. I took 2 covers of 2 of the AC/DC albums. So just save those to your working folder. The other useful thing for the working folder is sometimes we download, like maybe I want to install some kind of package or library and it comes in a big zip file. So I'll download and extract the zip file into that working folder, then take out the pieces that I need and copy them into my working solution. So inside of working now, you should have saved those 2 AC/DC album covers. So these 2 albums are in the database, so I went and grabbed the cover art. So once you have these, we'll take a pause. What we'll do after the break, the first thing we want to do is we want to make this browse functional. So we can actually select one of those, replace the cover image that's there, and save this one into content and images. So then when we go back in, the right image is going to actually show up for us. So we're going to need to do that on edit. We're then going to need to do the same thing on our create view. Rather than a text box, let's replace it with the same file upload, and we can basically copy that code from the edit method to the create post method. So we can add a cover image, both when we're adding an album or when we're editing. So we'll do that, then we'll fix up these drop downs and we'll play around with some of the stuff in the model so that we get better labels. Okay. I will put everything I've done on GitHub now, and we'll take a 20-minute break. We'll come back at 12:35. We'll try and start again then.